Okay, I think we can get started. Welcome, everyone, again, folks who are joining in. We are just getting started. Let me introduce George here. He's one of the protocol team member from Pagoda. And as you all know, the topic for today is the new role introduced via phase one of Sharding, which is chunk-only producer, and how that is different from block producers, and any questions you may have around it. So we want to keep the topic questions closer to the topic and relevant to the topic as well, which is helpful for the meaningful discussion here. However, if you have any questions, please raise your hands, or ask to be brought up as speaker. We're happy to do that. With that, George, please go ahead and introduce yourself a little more, and then we can get started on the topic. And please ask your question, folks, here.
Thank you for the introduction, Chetna. So, hello everyone, I'm George. I've joined Pagoda in June this year, so I'm 6 months in. Super happy to be part of the blockchain industry and to help the blockchain technology be easier to use, easier to adopt, which at the end of the day, that's one of our main goals at Pagoda. I'm part of the protocol organization. So what we do is we focus on improving the protocol, contributing to the open source implementation, and making our very ambitious roadmap happen. One of the items there is Nightshade, which is the incredible journey to implement sharding, full sharding on top of Near. We've executed a part of it. The recent release we had in September 129 included the what we call sharding phase one, which was the second phase of sharding. We left to start counting from zero. We had sharding phase zero at the end of 2021, and sharding phase one landed in September a couple of months ago. And this is a recurrent topic. We've touched about it. We've touched on it in a previous instance of the protocol office hours, given the impact of the change throughout the whole spectrum, from the economy of mainnet on if you look at the SID pricing up to the point the protocol works, introducing the chunk only producer and making progress through this sharding roadmap is impactful and is significant. So we brought it up again today to see if anyone has any other questions or would like to dive deep in any of the areas that are related to it.
Awesome. So with that, so if you can probably get started in terms of basic fundamentals about the role chunk only producer, and we also mentioned about how the seat increase the number of seats that's available. That is up for grabs, right? So we can talk about that also. Yeah, anything that you could think, because I don't see any hands up here, at least for now. How and when I see folks raising their hands, I can bring them up so that they can ask their question as well. So yeah.
Excellent. So let me then give you the short summary of what's the context for the chunk only producer and what does it mean. At the end of the day, one of the main goals that we have for Near and for the Near blockchain is to make the blockchain scalable. And an important way in which we do that is through sharding, which is splitting the work among a larger number of participating nodes. Introducing sharding means that the nodes at the end of this whole journey will focus only on a subset of the state, a subset of the transactions, those that are mapped on the shard that they belong to or the shard that they're associated with. And to be able to do that, with introducing sharding phase one, the role of the chunk only producer. I'm assuming all of you are pretty much familiar with the fundamentals of the blockchain technology. So Speeding up a bit, up in phase zero, every block was validated by a block producer who was following, monitoring, being connected, all the state in the network. In phase one, that will keep happening. So the blocks will be validated by nodes who are have full visibility over all the state. And this is for security reasons. What changed is the fact that when we are producing, we are differentiating the block production from chunk production. So now we have nodes which only produce chunks, let's call them fractions of a block that are that represent the mapping of a block on a certain shard, and they produce that chunk. And then when we produce the block, we just take all the chunks, we put them together, and we validate that the whole block makes sense, and we apply it and we update the state of the network. Um, from a workload perspective, given that each chunk only producer focuses on a smaller size of a state and works with um, a smaller workload, we can put it like that. The resources used by that node are smaller and will make the node cheaper to run. We will need, if you want to go into the full gory details of how all this thing works, there's a very nice design document that's called Nightshade. You can find it on your.org. Just Googling it will take you, probably the first link will take you to the right page on your.org. Um, so you can see there all the thinking and all the design details behind it. But if coming back, it makes sense to uh, distribute the load of the network over a larger number of nodes and have each of them handle a smaller amount of the state and a fraction of the transactions that are included in a block, and then be very very careful when we put it all together to make sense that to make sense of all that information and to prevent um, rogue nodes from attacking the network. There are a number of mechanisms in place today. As I said, when we do the validation, the nodes monitor the whole network, so for security purposes. But part of the next phase of sharding is a very nice set of mechanisms which allows us to actually progress from that state to a point where we can have challenges and we can have slashing in case a certain challenges uh, fails. So we've uncovered a rogue node, a node that wants to attack the network. And that's a very important milestone per se to be able to scale the network further. Um, if we look at the number of seats on mainnet up until September, again with sharding phase, when sharding phase zero was in place, we had 100 seats, 100 validator seats, and those were nodes that were producing blocks. We can call them block producers. Starting from September, we added an additional 200 seats, and those are for chunk-only producers. So right now there are 300 available seats. At the time of recording this, we have almost 140 nodes validating, and the number of nodes that participate, number of validators has increased gradually since September, and we expect to see this increasing number of validators to continue over the next months, up until the point where we're gonna have all of the seats full. The the people that participated in Stake Wars, once we're going to complete the delegations, will probably fill a good number of these seats. Now, with a larger number of nodes and a larger stake in the network, the seat price has gone down. So right now it's around 20K a year. Um, and this makes it more affordable for nodes to become a validator in terms of the stake needed. What else? A very important distinction. How do we select which node is a block producer and which node is a chunk only producer. So what we're doing is we're sorting the list of validators in a decreasing order based on the state that they have. And we are selecting the top 100 to be block producers, and we are selecting the next up to 200 to be chunk only producers. And there is a minimum threshold that the nodes need to a minimum threshold of stake that the nodes need to have in order to be eligible to be a validator node. Chetna, am I missing something? Should I dive deep on any of these areas?
So I think I see a requester here, Matthias. He might have a question. Let me bring him up. While you were thinking, so I was also thinking about, like you mentioned, about the difference, how we choose block producer versus chunk only producers. So if you can dig a little deeper in that topic, would be helpful as well. But before you do that, Matthias, welcome and welcome again. Thank you for being regular on the calls for us. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for these office hours. They're really great to stay on top of things. I actually have two small questions. First of all, it will be interesting to actually know the trade-off between between the strategy of just using shards versus using chunk producers. When does it make more sense to actually become a chunk producer instead of a complete shard and a complete validator? I get the price hit, of course, that plays into it, but from a technical standpoint, I mean, what will be the technical trade-offs between those? And looking into the future, I'm wondering if there's any other smaller type of processing unit from the chunk. I mean, we are going down from shards to chunks, and I wonder in the future if there's any smaller type of unit that could come into play in the future for another type of validator. Thanks.
Thank you for your questions, Matthias. Really interesting ones. So at the moment, we don't have a more finer granularity below chunks. So we have the blocks, and we look at the blocks as being composed of chunks. We don't have a more fine-grained granularity than that at the moment, and I don't expect us to have anything smaller than that in the at least near future. We have to complete our Nightshade journey first before planning the next stage. That will take us to 1 billion active accounts. We're still targeting that, and Nightshade is contributing significantly to us being able to scale. So that's the answer to your second question. As for the first one, there are two things. One, depending on the hardware resources that you have when you're running a node, you may want to focus on the chunk only producer if you want to have a smaller amount of resources allocated, like smaller CPU counts or core counts, a smaller amount of memory or a smaller storage size. That will definitely create a different cost versus rewards equation in terms of what it means to be profitable as a validator. And regarding the rewards are proportional to the stake that people have. So the chunk only producers have a smaller amount of stake. As I said, we're sorting the list of nodes in a decreasing order based on the stake that they have, which means that the amount of rewards they will get by performing work will also be smaller. So this funnels back into that equation that I said, which says what are the rewards you're getting as a chunk only producer and what are the costs that you're paying to be able to run the node, the hardware costs and network traffic, or if you're going through a cloud provider, the monthly bill that you have pay for those services. And that's something that each person needs to balance to see how it works. Did I cover, Matthias, your question? Did I miss
Yeah,
anything?
perfectly. Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Uh, I just I just kind of wonder if that path doesn't take us to a future where people will actually build specialized hardware systems to build a chunk producer on, and get back to the ASICs model of processing. So, so yeah,
Yeah,
but
that would be a nice future. But for now, the at least in the way we look at the near client is designed to run on general purpose hardware x86. We have ARM support, and in the last release, in the 130 release, we actually made a fix that allows the client to run better on M1 computers. So you can actually make your way with an ARM architecture, but it's still general purpose. So
yeah,
we don't have anything specific though.
yeah, exactly. But if you think about it, I mean, the whole infrastructure is built on Rust, and there's like this whole movement to put Rust into embedded systems. And when you start combining those, then I mean, I'm not talking like 6 months or even 12 months ahead, but I just see that progressing into that, especially when when the Rust community is so uh, enthusiastic when it comes to these projects, right? And honestly, that will be an awesome project if somebody just went ahead and said like, hey, I'm going to port near core, or at least some of the features that actually made near core for that are worth for chunk producers, and build a bare metal type of thing where I can just run that, and it makes more sense, with the price it going down, and as you mentioned, the actual rewards that you can get from running this to build a specialized hardware type of system. But hey, I'm just digressing, and sorry for the rambling. I just find it's very interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you for answering.
definitely worth exploring and seeing what it means to build hardware capabilities that are tailored for the amount of work and the type of work that near core is doing. That's definitely something to think about.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthias. I think specialized hardware is an interesting point of view. I think we are early in the stage of even looking at that, but it's a great kind of idea. I not we can see that in the but the thing is we want to create less friction for the folks who wants to run their node and become a validator. The minute you make a specialized hardware, until you reach the economies of scale, the hardware will come at a higher cost for folks, right? So I think that's another thing to think about. The idea why we increase speed is to make it more less barrier to entry for people who wants to run their node and be that validator on the mainnet, right? So that's how I think. But you never know. Future, most of us don't know what future holds, but we should be open-minded in terms of how we are driving in that direction. Awesome. George, again, going back to the previous question, seed price being lowered because of increased number of seats that's available. Would that? I think the question is like a little confusing. Is like, if I want to be a block producer who's new node runner in the mainnet, the seed price is low. Does that mean that I can be a block producer? What are kind of criteria to become a block producer versus a chunk producer?
The main criteria is the state that you have. That's a differentiator. And right now on mainnet, for example, the last block producer has about 390,000 a year. That fluctuates. So this number may be different by the time you're listening to this recording. But as of December 14th, when we are now, it's 390,000 a year, give or take. So you either need to have that stake, in order to be in the top 100 and be a block producer. Or if you don't have the stake, then you're going to be a chunk only producer. But at the end of the day, as I said, what's important to keep in mind is that rewards are proportional to the stake that you have, and they're not distinctly proportional to either of these two roles. So it doesn't matter if you're a block or a chunk only producer. What matters more is the percentage of stake that you have um, correlated to the overall stake on mainnet. So that's the main differentiator in terms of rewards.
Got it. Cool. Any other questions, folks, here in the listening mode? Dennis, I don't want to call you out or single you out, but if you have any questions on behalf of folks who reach out to you, Dennis here is our DevRel, who kind of represent and face a lot of community and customer questions. So if you have, let us know, Dennis. We can bring you up as well. Awesome.
So ideally, for developers, all the things that we're talking here regarding the way we optimize a protocol, the way we scale it, should be fully transparent if we do a very good job. And for them, the network should just be available and they should just be able to build on top of it. One thing that does influence them is the actual the transaction cost that they're paying. And with more validating nodes in mainnet, that's a pressure for the price to go down, since the network overall is going to have a higher capacity. So this is actually the main benefit that developers will have from all the effort that we're spending together as an ecosystem to make the protocol scale better.
I love it. Dennis, go ahead.
Yeah, Gregor, I saw in our Slack that you recently did some performance improvements in the networking for the protocol. I was wondering if you could maybe run us through how you did that and how that worked. And yeah, I'm very curious to hear all the devy details behind this.
Yeah, so I think that's Gregor's. It's another engineer from the protocol team. It's not me.
Oh yeah, sorry, I read you. Sorry, George. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No
I read
worries,
your name wrong.
no worries, no worries. That's fine. I'm from around the protocol. So while I don't have all the details around the changes that we did, um, definitely I invite anyone who's interested in the gory part to actually look on GitHub. The nice part of the open source development is that everyone is encouraged to look at the code and to see how things are implemented. And a lot of the insights around the approaches and optimizations and the things that we're doing are very, very visible in the code. So that's a very useful exercise if you want to have fun in a cold winter evening. You can actually browse our GitHub or the repository and have a look at the code there. Now, coming a bit back to your question, the changes that we're doing on the network are usually meant to improve the way nodes interact with each other, decrease the amount of traffic that's needed for a node to be able to produce a block and to have the headers that it needs from the different chunks, or to be able to get in sync faster with the latest state. Definitely, we need network to be able to coordinate among nodes. And we are aware that network is expensive. It's not something that's infinitely available and cheap. So we're always focused in making improvements to make it easier for people to run nodes. One, and two, to make it more efficient in the way the nodes interact with each other. So if nodes are able to keep in sync faster, that means they're able to produce blocks faster. And that increases the overall throughput of the network, which is a good thing at the end of the day.
Awesome, great. So we have Paul here. Hey, Paul, go ahead and ask the question, please.
Hey, thanks. Hey, George, how you doing?
Hey, Paul.
But I got a couple of questions. One is on validator node counts, the number of active chunk producers and block producers, and then another is on the APY comment you made earlier. I just want to clarify. So at the moment, we're at around 143, I think, validators and chunk producers. What is it at a high level that determines that number? Is there an algorithm between that and seat price and total amount staked or something like? What is it that's driving that number? Is that something you're setting at the moment, or is that something that's being algorithmically determined?
So it's a combination of a few things. On one side, there is a hard limited configuration of how many seats we have. Right now, that's being configured at 300, with the first 100 being block producers and the following 200 being chunk-only producers. So that's a hard definition of the number of seats. Now, to look at how we fill those seats, there are two additional things. The first one is there is a minimum stake ratio required to be eligible to fill in one of those seats. And this is, if my memory serves me well, it's a ratio, something along the lines of 160 divided by 1 million, and that's the ratio for block producers, and 40 divided by 1 million, and that's the ratio for the chunk-only producers. If you have that, then you are eligible to get a seat. And but I think this is, I'm reasonably confident in those numbers. We do need to check the code, but I think those are the ratios. And the third thing, and the last one that influences, is I can call it the street price of the seat. So if we have more people wanting to join, if we have pressure on those seats, then the seat price will go up. If we don't have pressure on those seats, then the seat price will be dictated by this ratio. So as long as you have one token on top of that ratio as a stake, then you would be eligible. And we control the first two things. We control the threshold, how many seats we have, and we control the ratios. What's the minimum amount of stake that you should have to be able to fill those seats. But what we do not control, and it's controlled by the community, not the community, I can call it the market, is how many people want to be in those seats. So from my perspective, that's the largest factor that influences the seat price. If we have a lot of people that want to join, the seat price will go up.
Yeah, so more people competing at that, whatever it is, 20K level at the moment, and going to 23, 24, 25, there's going to be some pressure, that will drive the seat price up, trying to bring these ratios back in line. And then you can, through updates, then alter that min stake ratio to then start that being less aggressive and therefore allowing more and more chunk producer seats to become available. And then you can allow that to go to 300.
No, we're not going to change anything on our side. We're going to let the validator seats to fill up gradually. We have 159
so you're going to keep that
now.
stake ratio the same as the intention?
Yes, that stake ratio is going to stay the same. Yes. And that's a ratio which is an absolute number, not a relative one, so it doesn't matter. It's a ratio of what's your stake reported to the overall cumulative stake in the network. And the reason behind having that ratio is to make sure that you, as a node, do have a chance to actually produce something. Because what we're doing is the blocks or the chunks are assigned to these up to 300 nodes proportional to the stake ratio that they have. Mm-hmm. And if you have a very small stake ratio, then the chance for you to be assigned to produce a block or a chunk decreases. So if you have a ratio that's very, very small. You're going to be there and you're not going to be asked to do anything. And that's going to make a very bad experience for the validators. They're going to run the node and they're not going to have work to do.
Okay. So just if I can just double click on one thing, the thing that's going to drive the number from 143 to 300 is nodes coming in with delegations above the seat price, but those coming in is going to drive the seat price higher. So they
not for the moment. The seat price will not go up for the moment. Ish. I mean, it's still that ratio, but as long as we're gonna continue having seats that are not filled in, we're not gonna have a large pressure to take the seat price up.
Right. Okay, because they're estimating like roughly how much is going to come in through delegations and unstakes and things. Okay.
Yeah.
If I can, I don't see time. This has been super helpful. If I can, unless there's anything else you want to clarify on that, I'll move to the APY question if that's okay.
No. Just to I don't know. Tell the same thing from a different angle. That we're gonna have some pressure on the seat price as we get closer to that 300 limit, which is the natural economical, the natural mechanism in the economy where we have multiple people wanting
so
to get something.
What's been causing the recent volatility in seat price? The sort of moves between like 60, 20.
No, it's exactly this mechanism where we created a large number of additional seats, and as people join with a smaller amount of stake, then as long as they are eligible and they meet the criteria, they're going to become a validator, and the lowest stake there will dictate the lowest seat price.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so on the APY, originally in documentation online, at least splash pages, home pages, I see the original plan was that the APY would be, I think, a half or like a 5% was the touted figure for chunk producer. Now we see as these have come online, that hasn't changed. Is that meaning that it's just not been done yet, or is the intention now to just keep it as it is and keep it the same for a chunk producer and a block producer?
The thinking is not to make a difference between these two nodes, so to treat them as, from this perspective, as the same. So I don't expect us to have different APYs on the block versus chunk.
Okay, and any things of that nature, I assume we see as a sort of governance issue. And something sort of like discussed in those forums, like more broadly in terms of ecosystems and such.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Can you please rephrase the question? I don't think I got it. So was it a comment like what it was a comment saying that the APYs and everything is more along the lines of the governance forums?
Yeah, let me rephrase. So originally it was advertised at 5. So I assume that at some point that was an intention. It has now continued to, as it's been rolled out, that mechanism for whatever reason was not in place, and so now it remains the same. And so that is a decision taken somehow. So it's sort of interesting to know how that decision is made, and then is the intention moving forward decisions like that are a pagoda-led decision, or like how would we expect sort of inflation discussions to take place?
That is a very deep and complex conversation, and definitely not something that touches on the technical side of what Pagoda is doing. So the developer governance is very important to be solid. The validator governance is very important to the community governance. I think that's the right phrasing. It's very important to be solid, to be able to navigate through that conversation and to see what happens, to see what's the right approach. How do we have a healthy economy on mainnet? It impacts a lot of things, so definitely something that has to be treated really seriously. Yet it's not directly related to the technical details of how the protocol works or to any technical deliverable that we have today on the plate.
Yeah, clear. Thank you, George. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Paul, as well, for asking your questions. It's really helpful.
Thank you.
So we have about 20 more minutes. Any other subtopic, George, do you think about that is useful to share with the folks here? Or anybody in the audience as well, please do ask question pertaining to Near Protocol specifically. And if it is focused on the topic today, would also be beneficial to the rest of them who are listening here as well. Yeah. So with that, George, if you have any other subtopic that you think is useful to share in the meantime.
No, I think I kind of covered what they wanted to touch on, the fundamentals of the sharding and where the chunking producer fits into this whole story.
Awesome.
We're super excited about the whole Nightshade architecture and all the stages of sharding that we are working on. So as an engineer, I think this is one of the coolest problems to solve. How do you implement sharding on a large scale decentralized system? And how do you do it live without interrupting the system's functionality? We've done that a number of times. We've made updates so many times over the past years to mainnet that we've kind of learned how to make live updates. And this gives us confidence that despite the complexity of what's ahead of us, we can actually deploy all that in mainnet live without any downtime. But yeah, the technical challenges of the Nightshade roadmap are really nice. So as an engineer, as I said, I love working on this.
Awesome, glad to hear.
Back to any of our listeners in case they have any other questions.
Yeah. I don't see any hands up, hand raise or anything. We can also wrap up early if you don't see any other questions. And since we don't have anything else to share further on this topic, we can wrap up early and give time back to folks as well. Do you want to quickly wrap up saying what's in store for future, George, in terms of phase 2 that we are looking forward?
Sure. By the way, there's a very nice blog post that we shared a couple of months ago. It's on pagoda.co on Pagoda's website. It's written by Bowen and goes a bit in depth, just a bit, on what we have planned for 2023 and 2024 related to the protocol changes that will happen, the protocol upgrades that will happen. It's an interesting read. I encourage all of you to have a look at it. It's not very long, so it's going to be pretty quick to digest. But it gives a solid set of insights around what we want to do and what you should expect. So for sharding specifically, to be more clear, what we want to do roughly in 2023 is to be able to scale to even more shards. Today we have 4 shards, and this is a hard-coded number that was introduced with phase 0, and that we still have today. Those 4 shards are meant as a playground to develop all the other mechanisms around. The intention is to increase the number of shards significantly. So with the next phase, we want to go up to 100 shards. That's going to improve the parallelization of processing. We're going to have challenges, as I said. Doing a small recap, today when we're producing a block, the nodes that produce the block producers, those first 100 validators, they have full visibility over all the state, and they need to be in sync with all the states. So the work that you're doing is more significant. And that will change in phase 2. So in phase 2, the nodes will kind of delegate trust to the chunk only producers and will trust the data that they have. That trust is based on a set of mechanisms, strong mechanisms, which make sure that the network is robust. And at the end of the day, the things that we're producing um, are true, are correct, and we don't have nodes that attack the network and ingest false state into it. Again, a reference to our Nightshade design doc. If you're interested to go into the details, there's a very nice conversation, explanation, description there around how these are happening. So with challenges, so with this allegation, we're going to have challenges. Definitely, that's a very important mechanism which gives confidence in the fact that if a node programmatically, automatically identifies a certain chunk as being suspicious, then it can challenge the chunk only producer node who created it. And the consequence of a challenge that proves to be true, which means that node was misbehaving, is stake slashing. So that's going to be a very important piece of all this story. With scaling the number of shards up to 100, we're going to introduce a number of changes that allow the network to be more efficient in the way data is being transferred across nodes. So that work that I mentioned that Gregors was doing, along those lines, we're going to make a number of additional improvements in scalability and in the way nodes interact with each other. At the end of the day, the goal being to reduce the pressure on network as a resource as much as we can. So these are very important parts of the next phase of sharding, and we expect it, as I said, we expect it to land in 2023 at the end of the year, and to have a few stake wars iterations until then to support this journey. So you're going to hear about stake wars again with different flavors of the program, definitely, depending on what we want to test. We kind of know what we want to test, but we haven't released the thing yet to the public, so stay tuned.
That's awesome. That's a great wrap and summary, George. Thank you again. Any last questions, folks who are on there to speak? I see Paul unmuting. Do you have anything?
I was just, as you were talking, there's like all really interesting stuff, and I was just skimming through as you were talking. Bowen's blog. It's really good, and there's a few things actually here that's interesting. I don't know the topics we have time to cover or you want to touch on. One was like the tier 1, tier 2 networking. That'd be interesting to know a little bit more about. And then the other thing was, as we think about introducing slashing, it sort of occurs to me that the validator key now, and the security around the validator key becomes a lot more important, because as it stands today, I think the worst that can happen is that if it's exfiltrated, someone can maliciously start pretending to be you, double signing blocks, and then getting you kicked. Like, that's the extent of the damage. In the world of slashing, if the key gets exfiltrated, then there can be significant loss of funds depending on what the rules are and what the percentages are. How's the thinking going along at the moment in terms of like what that looks like? Has there been much discussion around that yet, or is it early days? And then around things like remote signing capabilities or other options like that to try and support sort of key security.
So regarding tier 1, tier 2, let's have that as part of a future protocol office hours. It's worth going in depth on the roadmap and giving sufficient space to all those items, so we have a better chance of transmitting the enthusiasm that we have around them. Now, for keeping the key secure, super important, definitely. As a service operator, it's critical to have a strong operational posture, to have a strong security posture, to know how to handle and to be able to handle the sensitive material that's part of the service you're running. Most of that is something that the validator community has to drive into to figure out what tools are needed. We'll be very happy to see if the near client should support something additional to what it does today to make an easier integration with tools that exist or to make it easier to build tools on top of it. So just give me a ping. I'll be super keen to chat about it and to hear the thoughts that you have. At the end of the day, though, as I was saying, it's the validators, the operator's responsibility, the node operator's responsibility to have a very strong security posture and to manage those sensitive materials carefully.
Yeah. Happy to follow all those things. And just on that final point around the actual mechanisms of slashing, so like particular rules, percentages, things like that. Where are you in those plans?
So we have an early thinking about it. We are maturing it, and probably by mid next year, we're going to have a better picture around how this is going to be implemented.
Cool.
I understand your question, if the slashing is going to be full or if it's going to be a partial slash or how will this happen? And those are very important questions. Definitely, as a validator, I see their impact. By mid next year, we're going to have a better picture and we're going to be able to share more insights around how that will happen.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, George.
Sure.
So I brought up one last listener, DK Lab, who is connecting the audio, I guess. Hey there, go ahead and ask your question.
Hello there. Is it my turn?
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
Hello.
I think my network got a hiccup for a while, and I'm sorry. So just two quick questions. I was part of the Sharding event, and I'm aware that one of the ideas of Shard chunk producers nodes is so that we can lower the hardware requirement for the node. So I asked this question once in the Discord channel. I was told that yes, that's a plan, but at the moment we don't lower. We haven't lowered the hardware requirement yet. So maybe it's going to be in the future. So just small question there. Do we already have on our roadmap when that is going to happen? And maybe a very small follow-up question, which is super simple. So when we turn on our node and we look into the log, we always see that there is a number 100, right? So it matches the 100 block producers that we have in the network right now. I assume that's expected, right? So even in the future, if we have 300, that number would probably just stay there because that is for the block producers.
Yeah. So right now the limits are 100 block producers and 200 additional chunk-only producers. I expect these numbers to change actually as we move along with implementing sharding. One of the goals that we have for this whole effort is to actually scale the network in better ways and be able to have more than 300 validators in the network. So those numbers will increase over time. I don't have today a clear roadmap of I don't know how many validating nodes you're going to have in 2024, as that depends a lot on the data that we're going to get throughout 2023 on how the network scales to 100 shards. What does it mean for the nodes that participate? How is the load being distributed? All that will contribute to figuring out what's the right size of the number of validators that we have. So that's on your second question, and the first one I think was related to. Can you please repeat it?
Hardware.
Yeah, exactly.
Hardware requirements. Got it. Hardware requirements. Got it. Sure. So the hardware requirements are, you can look at it as an indicator. It's not something set in stone. If you don't meet those requirements, nothing is going to work. Or if you meet them, everything is going to be flower power, super nice and working like a charm. It's an indicator. It's a reference you can use. Definitely, you can work with hardware that's below that with a certain risk. I've seen a lot of the people in the validator community working with specs that are way on top of the recommended minimum requirements because they find that to be a better operational fit for what they need to add more hardware and to get better performance out of better performance meaning a smaller chance to miss blocks or chunks that they were supposed to produce. So this is definitely a conversation to have. It's not something set in stone. We will definitely come with a guidance around the chunk only producer and the minimum requirements that we see for it in the upcoming months. Probably as we also get to have access to more data around how the nodes perform. But at the end of the day, this is something that it's a trial and error and experimentation on the operator side as well to see what works.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable, and we would really appreciate any more information on this space in the future, of course. But anyway, a little bit more elaboration. The reason I ask is because while running the Shardnet node, I noticed that to keep our threshold in a good space, right? About for example, about 60 or 70% uptime, then our storage system has already have to be SSD and above, maybe NVMe. So by hardware, of course, storage is still a very generic thing, right? It could be CPU, it could be storage, but I was mainly meaning the storage. So I get a vibe that even when we go with chunk producing only, our storage would still have to be at least SSD. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, the storage needs to be SSD. It offers the right I/O performance for being able to cache things and to read things that you stored there. So the difference between the chunk and the block producer are mostly in terms of the size of the resources. The type of the resources are basically the same. So you need an SSD, definitely, for the storage. Now, the one comment I have regarding Shardnet, there are two things to keep in mind. The first is with Shardnet, we stretched the code, we stretched the chunk only producer implementation, the sharding implementation of phase one. We stretched it in ways that we could not have stretched it otherwise. And that gave us very good insights, and we were able to provide fixes for the limitations that we saw there. And those fixes mean that the performance on mainnet will definitely be better than what we've seen on Shardnet. Shardnet was running dev-ready, internally tested code that was good, but that was not battle-tested in significant ways. And the whole Stakeforce program helped a lot in being able to mature that code and then to work with the community to learn how it scales to that size. So that's one thing. And two, the workloads that we've seen on Shardnet varied throughout the Stakeforce program, from very low limited workloads to workloads that stress the hell out of things. So we had moments when we wanted to get data around a certain parts of the code, and we added workload that surfaced that. So the experience and the load that you've seen throughout the program varied significantly from one extreme to the other one. While on mainnet, the load is a bit more predictable, if I can call it. No, not predictable. A bit more uniform, if I can call it like that. I don't think in mainnet we can expect to see incredible fluctuations like the ones we've seen in Shardnet. So that by itself is something to keep in mind when you look at the experience there. So overall, to be more specific on the hardware specs, probably the chunking producer will require a smaller CPU count and a smaller amount of memory and a smaller amount of storage. The type of memory, the type of storage, the CPU features are basically the same. Because it is the same client that works just under a different workload. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does. I think we lost DK Lab because of his network, but I think he gave a thumbs up when you were saying he reconnected back. He's in the list more. So looks like he gave another thumbs up. So we should be, I think there are time actually. We got good questions at the rear end of the conversation or the hour. But regardless, it was really meaningful for me. And I'm hoping it's the same for you folks who are here. Yeah. Thank you again for coming back to these office hours every week. And we want to continue hosting this for you folks. And especially for the validators, we have created a working group in Telegram. You should be able to search near working group. Near validator working group, I guess. If you join there, I would highly recommend to have async conversation because these are live conversations. We are recording them. However, I think it's always good to have async kind of continue what we discussed here in Telegram group as well. With that, let's close this session. Thank you, George, and thank you everyone coming here, and thank you, Nico, for hosting us as always. Have a great rest of the day wherever you are. And bye all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye all.